our way too early SEC champion for 2024. You wanted to have a little fun with it. So since it's your segment, I'll give it over to you first. Who is going to be your way too early SEC champion in 2024?
So we're obviously going to do this a second time when we're getting close
Probably a third time.
No, we're not doing it 3 times. I will, as the producer of this show as well as one of the hosts, I will not allow for us to do it 3 times. That would be ridiculous. But figure in the month of January, it could be fun to kind of do this and see if we can get this shit correct in January. Maybe we come this far out. I think that the easiest conference for me to predict.
We come this far out. Continue.
I think that the easiest conference to predict next year's winner is the SEC. I think that there's a lot of other conferences that have a lot of shuffling at top, especially the Big 12 with all these other teams coming in. I think the ACC is a little bit more up for grabs than some people think, but Florida State is the clear favorite. Same thing we talked about here at the Big 10, where Ohio State's geared back up, but what does Michigan do? The SEC, on the other hand, we saw one team gear up, bring back most of their important players. One of the best quarterbacks in the country that when we do our way too early Heisman pick is going to be in that conversation as well. And then on top of that, they had the best recruiting class with a couple freshmen that I think could step on the field and play early. And of course, I'm talking about the Georgia Bulldogs. Now they're losing Brock Bowers. They're losing Amarius Mims, Ladd McConkey, Cedric Van Pran. They're starting center, but coming back for them, it is so massive that Carson Beck decided not to declare for the NFL draft. And the fact that they added a productive back in Trevor Etienne, who I think is going to be so huge for this Georgia rushing attack that had a constant cycling because of injuries in the running back room, to have somebody like this leading the way will be huge for their run game. London Humphreys is a big-bodied receiver who not going to be as productive as some of these other guys this past year, but is a nice piece to add to the receiver room, to a room that, again, dealt with a shit ton of injuries. And then I love the fact that there's a possibility that guys like KJ Bolden and Ellis Robinson could get on the field early and really, really make some splashes. We talked about yesterday about Travaris Robinson taking over as this co-DC. I'm sure he'll have a hand in the DBs. There is so much talent to work with. I think that the ceiling is so high for this Georgia team. And I know you agree with me because we've already talked about this a little bit. There are other teams that have done some great stuff, but they're going to come second to Georgia.
I will say this. I do think it was a little bit of a troll today, in case you saw it. So last night, which I do think is a whole nother segment that we need to get into. So I could just start it here. Maybe you can clip it. Maybe you can. I don't know. But T-Rob did an interview, a 3-hour interview with Alabama and Kalen.
So many Alabama fans commented on our video that like, oh, he's not leaving. Oh.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that very quickly. T-Rob had an interview with Kalen DeBoer yesterday. Apparently, it's being reported it was a 3-hour interview, and told him, thanks, no thanks, I'm going to Georgia. What did you think about that very quickly? Like, what were your thoughts on that?
I'm sure that the role was very similar. I'm sure that the opportunity was very similar. I mean, if I'm
actually calling plays at Alabama, he's not calling plays at Georgia.
Yeah, but if I'm T-Rob, after I've already been a part of a previous coaching staff that was fired when I was the DC last time at South Carolina, why would I want to risk going through that again when I could just go to Georgia, have 2 good years, and then get hired as the head coach?
I agree.
The path is more clear.
I do think that there's one thing, Joe, that we're not accounting for when it comes to this Georgia team next year. They have a pretty tough schedule. Now, they have the ability to get through all of it. I'm not saying that they don't. But here's what I look at, okay? They play at Kentucky. They play at Alabama, which I think they're going to win there because of obviously Nick Saban not being there. They got to play at Texas. They got to play at Ole Miss. That's a lot of games on the road not to potentially slip up for one, right? Like, I mean, I'm hedging a bet that they slip up in one. Don't think it matters.
No.
Don't think it matters. I do think they have one of the tougher schedules in the country next year. Oh, and by the way, they play Clemson in week 1 Okay, so it's
They're
not
going to win that. That's not going to.
But see, here's the thing. It doesn't matter what you think about Clemson. They are playing a really good team. Look, Clemson's a 9-win football team. 9.
Still going to win.
Doesn't matter. I still think that Georgia got way too much criticism while the SEC wouldn't allow them to play Oklahoma. Look at it now. All right. Joe, obviously I'm going to hedge my bet that if I had to pick the 2024 SEC champion right now in January, yes, I would probably pick Georgia. But I do think that you have a really good Texas team that returns. I think you got a lot of pieces that they have. Obviously, Isaiah Bond going to be a Longhorn next year. I think he gets a lot of more touches, and they have a lot of weapons. Look, I do think that there are teams out there like Ole Miss that we will see how they do against Georgia next year that could make a little bit of a run. If I had to hedge my bet, yes, I'm obviously picking Georgia, but I do think that there are some teams out there that could challenge Georgia that nobody is giving them credit for.
I don't disagree with that. And I think that what Ole Miss has done, which we talked about, that they're now in this running to be, I mean, now that Saban's retired, they might be the second best team in the SEC going into 2024. That's a very realistic conversation to sit here and have. That team's really good. But at the same time, it feels like Lane Kiffin has still found ways in some of his biggest games to fall short. I think that they're going to have a better record at the end of the season. But for whatever reason, Lane Kiffin gets in his own way and over schemes and doesn't do the proper preparation to set his team up to win in their biggest games. He did it against Alabama. He did it against Georgia. It has cost them. I'm concerned about Texas, and I'm not saying that Texas is going to be shit in the SEC. Texas is good enough to win 10 games in the SEC based on their roster. But the way that they played against Washington in the college football playoff was fucking soft. They only came back because Kalen DeBoer in Washington had poor late game management. They played soft. They played conservative. They played scared. They fell for the trap. That's not going to work in the SEC. I don't think that they're that high up in the contention as people think. And for LSU, which is going to get brought up in this conversation.
I didn't bring them up.
No, but I'm just saying in the general SEC conversation, their defense is still a question mark. We have to see it before we can believe it, which is not going to happen until spring ball.
I'm going to make a hot statement. You ready?
All right.
I think LSU is going to be better overall as a team. I don't think they're better offensively with Jaden Daniels leaving, but I think so. Let me give you an example as to why. Joe, LSU averaged 9 to 10 possessions when Jaden Daniels was their quarterback because their defense sucked. When Garrett Nussmeier is in there against Wisconsin, they had 16. What do I mean by that? It's because I do think that there is a chance that overall they are better because they bring in Bo Davis. They bring in a guy like Kevin Peoples, who I'm just going to tell you, and I'll talk about this on my show tonight. Joe, did you know that no other edge rush defensive line coach has more than Kevin Peoples, all conference performers, or draft picks?
Really? Wow.
But you wouldn't know that because a lot of his guys aren't first round top 10 picks. But what are they? They are he literally in 11 seasons had 11 or 5 seasons, had 11 all conference performers. He got the number 1 recruit in the country to commit and sign with Missouri. I want to hedge my bet on LSU being better overall as a team, okay, next year. But there is one thing that I will agree with you on the team that I cover and like.
Okay.
You're 1,000% right that they have question marks. I do think that, though, what does it look like with a young team, which what they had last year? What do they look like in another year of development under Brian Kelly? They played a lot of freshmen last year on defense. Does Blake Baker figure out something with Harold Perkins? They do have weapons and they do have pieces. The interior of the defensive line is the massive question mark, but I do think they bring in Bo Davis, who is one of the best defensive line coaches in the country. They have a very favorable schedule, though. They have Alabama. They don't face Georgia. They play Vandy in there. Okay. So LSU does have a favorable schedule, but only in the SEC. Joe, they face off against UCLA at home, and they got USC in Vegas. So,
I mean, I don't know how is UCLA at home. You said,
yeah, UCLA's
okay,
home. Let me tell you something.
Not having to go there is a good thing because
LSU did
tough.
go there. That was the beginning of the end for Ed Orgeron. People are going to be pissed off at that game, and I will tell you, I do think that Brian Kelly, there is some extent for him here. It's playoff or bust. He's got to make the playoff.
Which now it's easier, so it's
doesn't matter.
It's not as difficult.
Doesn't matter. he better make it.
Let me ask you this question before we get out of here.
Okay.
We've already kind of talked about this because how much we've dissected the Kalen DeBoer news. How much of a chance, if you were to throw out a percentage, would you say Alabama
60
of winning the SEC?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot higher than I would give it.
You know why? Because there's still a shitload of talented players on that team.
Well, man, I think that's too hard to predict because we don't know. I mean, like if Caleb
maybe
Downs
hops, maybe 60 is too favorable.
They're right. Like Caleb Downs is a guy who might hop in the portal and end up at Georgia. Like there's a possibility that comes to fruition.
57%.
I'm gonna say like 30. I don't think it's super high. I just
think they got a crap load of talent, man. You can't take away that they have a crap load of talent. Not everybody's hitting the portal.
Yeah, but like, I don't know. I feel like people discount how hard it is for a coach to come in his first year and immediately win because he's got to get used to his roster.
In the SEC West?
He did, but they also did lose the SEC championship game against a Death Star Georgia team. But it's
what are we talking about?
It's hard to come in and get used to your roster and get your guys to buy in and get them ready to fire on all cylinders to win the conference. I just think that's too high of a standard. Maybe for them to get to the game is possible.
It could be, but I don't think I don't know if they're one of the four best teams. I think they go to Baton Rouge this year, and I think go tell all. Like they could be a one-loss team going into Baton Rouge next year, and I think they're going to get beat.
That's a good point.
Because can I tell you something that nobody's talking about before we get out of here very quickly? Here's one thing that nobody's mentioned about the Kalen DeBoer hire. You ready? Every single freaking week, every week. Yeah, it's cute that you think you went to hostile environments in the pack. You think that you've been to hostile environments. Wait till you go to Baton Rouge in the first weekend in November, and you can't think straight. Joe, let me tell you something. I legitimately have been on the sideline for an LSU Alabama game, and it's taken me 3 days for my ears to stop ringing. Okay?
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is we talk about can he do it in the SEC? It's different with guys like Kelly. It's different with guys like Harbaugh or Urban or whatever. Those dudes are different. I think that there's a bigger issue here that nobody wants to discuss. What happens when he goes to a Baton Rouge at Saturday night in Death Valley? What happens?
You better get his shit straight. You better lock in.
He better, because if you don't and you don't get out and start leading early, you're going to get your shit punched in. People think I'm crazy. I think Kalen DeBoer can win 10 games consistently. He's going to get his teeth kicked in on some of these games now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. When they play Georgia, when they play LSU, you better get ready.
Let me tell you something. You ready? Georgia is going to smack the dog shit, pun intended, out of Alabama next year.
Oh, after the SEC championship game, they're going to try and embarrass them.
Yeah, they're going to embarrass them. And at their own home field.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.